Well, it's been a big week in Victorian politics, and of course the news that I just brought you then, that Victorians may be on the hook for at least $4.5 million amid the cost to cancel the Commonwealth Games, with negotiations still ongoing. And the news also in the last few hours that Alberta in Canada has now decided to withdraw its intention to bid for the 2030 Commonwealth Games. So what does this mean for the future of the event? What does this mean for the state of Victoria? The Victorian Opposition leader, John Pesutto, joins me now live here in our Melbourne studio. Great to have you back.
Pleasure to be here, Simon.
So Alberta's decision, what does this mean for Victoria ultimately?
I think, Simon, at this early stage, and we're all processing it, I think there are two key risks for Victoria now. I think the Commonwealth Federation will probably seize on what Alberta has done to say, see, Victoria, you've damaged the reputation of the Commonwealth Games, so we're going to seek even greater damages and compensation. That's the first thing. The other thing is that Alberta shows what should have happened in Victoria. Alberta took a look at the Games and thought, well, we can't make it work. So the difference between Alberta not proceeding and Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen cancelling the Games is that Victorians will pay compensation and damages because Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen went out there and committed us to it just because they wanted to win an election with no real business plan. We're going to have to pay damages. But Alberta did the right thing. Presumably, they've conducted due diligence, they've had a look at it, they've looked at the costings and made a sensible decision for them. Instead, we're going to pay damages.
In terms of what I just revealed on Afternoon Agenda before, in terms of the redundancy payouts for staff, we know that obviously there's a lot of people caught up in this decision. Not just the staff that were working on the bid, Commonwealth Games Federation, athletes, regional Victorian businesses, but when you think of the staff and the fact that the government already in the budget had earmarked a plan to cut the public service and the redundancies and the negotiations would come out of that, are you concerned about the figure that the taxpayers could be on the hook for in terms of these payments? And I understand too that when it comes to executive payments, it could even be higher.
Oh, they'd probably be in the millions, possibly even tens of millions of dollars in terms of termination payments. And I feel for the staff. I don't blame the staff for what's happened here. I hold Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen responsible. But there are several components to that. So there's the termination payments, which could be in the millions, possibly tens of millions. But then, Simon, there's also all of the wages that were paid on something that was never going to proceed.
Well, they did the work though, so the wages still...
Of course the staff should be. Yeah. But in terms of the total costs, which now won't lead to the Commonwealth Games, if you add up all of that, that's got to figure in the total costs that Victorians will bear ultimately for this decision.
Do you think, though, that people in regional Victoria are caring about this decision at the moment? They might have cared 2 weeks ago. At the time, some of your MPs were telling me around the halls of Parliament today, and sources close to your coalition, that it's just not resonating in Victoria anymore, in regional Victoria anymore, this decision. Is that what you're hearing at all?
Look, no, and I'm not sure why that might be a view amongst some, because I'm talking to people in regional Victoria all the time, have been since this decision was made. They're all concerned because they get that it may have become too expensive. Like all Victorians, they're angry at Victoria being put in this position, but then again, they feel that they were promised infrastructure, not only sporting infrastructure, but legacy infrastructure, so-called, in the form of social and affordable housing. Now, the government's saying that it's got, $1 billion for housing. Well, that's 1,300 homes across regional Victoria. And that is going to be, if it's ever delivered, it's going to be far less than the benefits of the government having honoured its commitments.
But if the cost is way more, obviously that'd have a huge impact on debt, bottom line, services to Victorians, ultimately regional Victoria. So are you concerned that perhaps the spotlight on this story may fade a little bit in the regions? And I guess what will you be doing to keep the pressure on the government?
It's a good question. We'll be fighting for regional Victoria. And I've been speaking to people in regional Victoria this week, and they want us as an opposition to make sure we hold the government to its announcements recently that it will fund infrastructure and, in the form of social and affordable housing. But the Andrews government has to do a lot more than that. There are roads that are full of potholes and represent fairly serious risks to motorists in regional Victoria. We've been talking about that for many, many months. So it has obligations it's got to meet, and it's not meeting those. But regional Victoria needs a voice, and the opposition I'm honoured to lead is going to be that voice for it.
Speaking of regional Victoria, where do you stand on the timber industry? Because I want to pull up these photos, which have just appeared in an article that Matt Johnson's done, the big interview that you've done, talking about your upbringing in regional Victoria, in Traralgon, and talking about your association with the timber industry, your family's association. In the article, you've told Matt that the decision about the timber industry's essentially winding down may be similar to the Commonwealth Games in terms of the government's approach on it. I just want to ask you though, do you support this winding down of the timber industry? Because there are sources on Spring Street suggesting to me that in a candidates forum in Hawthorn last year, you may have actually supported some of what the government is doing in terms of the transition to plantation timber.
So my point was that there was a transition plan, and that if the government returned, that transition plan would proceed almost to its completion or close to its completion. It would go through much of the transitional work in that. So my point to that forum, which is still my view today, that had the government been returned, and it was, that transition plan would proceed. Now, the point I'm making in the interview I gave to Matt Johnson is that there was a transition plan to 2031, right? But the government came out and abruptly said, no, it's going to be the end of this year. And it's like, how can you treat people this way? You've got to treat people with respect, and you've got to be compassionate to people. There are people down there who've invested in machinery, who've made economic and other decisions to commit to that process, and then you just tell them abruptly, no, it's over in a few months. But that's not the way to govern.
Just to be clear though, do you support a transition at all?
Well, I think you've got to accept reality that the industry is in transition. We need a timber industry. And I told the forum that, and I maintain that as my view today. We need timber in Victoria.